Hi, my name is Greg Knox. I'm the Executive Director of Skeena Wild Conservation Trust, and I'm going to give you an update on the returns and harvest of Skeena Nass salmon and give you some information on other Central Coast and North Coast systems. And this information comes from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans' most recent post-annual review, which took place on December 2nd and 3rd. And the information is collected by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, by First Nations throughout the region who have their own fisheries programs, and some of it came from the province of BC, who manages steelhead. So I'm going to start with Skeena sockeye, and the total return to the Skeena was 1.26 million, and about 1.1 million made it back into the river systems to spawn. The aggregate escapement goal for Skeena sockeye is 900,000, so we exceeded that. However, many of the wild sockeye populations in the Skeena are depressed and did not experience very good returns this past season, so that's an ongoing concern. There were no commercial fisheries this year for Skeena sockeye. First Nations harvested about 144,000 in food fisheries. The recreational fishery harvested about 6,000 Skeena sockeye, and the Tyee test fishery harvested about 2,700 Skeena sockeye. There were significant reports of illegal fishing this past summer, especially out of Prince Rupert. However, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans provided no information on estimates of how many salmon may have been harvested in those illegal fisheries. Our salmon swim through Southeast Alaska on their way back to Skeena, Nass, and other systems in BC. And it's estimated that about 280,000 Skeena sockeye were harvested in Southeast Alaska this past year. For Nass sockeye, the total return was 413,000. 350,000 made it back to spawn, which is well above the 200,000 escapement goal, which is good news for the future. There were no ocean commercial fisheries for Nass sockeye. Recreational fisheries took roughly about 100 fish. Nisga'a Treaty took about 40,000 sockeye, and then First Nations food fisheries and in-river commercial fisheries took about 21,000. It's estimated that Alaska took roughly 100,000 Nass sockeye this year. For Haida Gwaii sockeye, the Copper and Awun river systems were average returns. The Yaccoon and Naden rivers were low returns this year. And the only other number I have for sockeye is on Rivers Inlet, which was very low. It's been depressed for a long time. Rivers Inlet's on the Central Coast. So moving on to Chinook, the Skeena Chinook return was roughly 24,500, and the number of spawners, the escapement, was about 20,000. This is one of the lowest returns on record. The Skeena used to average 80 to 120,000 Chinook a year. So very concerning there. There were no commercial fisheries targeting Skeena Chinook. About 130 are estimated to have been caught in troll fisheries off Haida Gwaii, so not very many. For recreational fisheries in river, the Chinook fishery was closed. There are about 7,400 caught out of Rupert, and usually only about 6.5% of those Chinook caught in Prince Rupert and sport fisheries are Skeena Chinook. For First Nations food fisheries, they caught about 4,200 Skeena Chinook in river. There are no numbers provided for food fisheries in the marine environment out of Prince Rupert and the North Coast in terms of numbers of Skeena Chinook caught. For Nass Chinook, the return was 21,000, and the number of spawners was about 14,000. So the escapement goal is 15,000, so we're pretty close to meeting the escapement goal. However, the long-term average is more in the 25,000 range, so below average return to the Nass. There were no commercial harvests of Nass Chinook. A small amount would have been caught in the North Coast troll fishery. The recreational fishery took about 400 Nass Chinook, and the marine recreational fishery took about 800 Nass Chinook. The rough estimate for Alaska is 1,100 Chinook caught in Alaskan fisheries, but that could easily be underestimated. For First Nations food fisheries and treaty fisheries, about 6,000 Nass Chinook were harvested. And the only other system I have information for is the Etnarco, which is Bella Coola. They saw average returns, and generally wild returns in the Central Coast were on the low side. So next up is Coho. For Skeena Coho, the total returns are not yet available. Tai was have an average estimate of Skeena Coho. Several Skeena systems, such as the Kitwanga, Toboggan Creek, and Cassix, were low. Others were average returns. The recreational fishery took about 600 Coho in the lower Skeena, and food fisheries took about 2,500 Skeena Coho. For Nass Coho, there was a good return this year, about 462,000. Roughly 271,000 of these were harvested, and 190,000 made it back into the river systems to spawn. Recreational in-river fisheries took about 600 Nass Coho. Marine recreational fisheries took about 6,100. Commercial fisheries like the North Coast Troll took about 60,000 Nass Coho. Food fisheries and treaty took about 8,000. And Alaska harvested 196,000 Nass Coho, so massive numbers caught in Southeast Alaskan fisheries. And for Kitimat and Douglas Channel, there were decent returns of Coho this year into those systems. So that was a bit better than the last couple of years. So next I'll talk about steelhead. For Skeena steelhead, we saw the worst return since 1958. It was about 20% of the historical average, and the provincial government currently estimates that about 5,400 steelhead returned to the Skeena. This is compared to a minimum escapement goal of 24,000 and an extreme conservation concern threshold of 8,000 steelhead. So we are well below the extreme conservation concern threshold this year for Skeena steelhead. There were little to no commercial fisheries that impacted Skeena steelhead this year in BC. There was sport fishing and catch and release fishing for steelhead. However, that was closed on October 12th due to the conservation concerns, but we have no estimates of what the impacts from those fisheries may have been. The Tai test fishery at the mouth of the Skeena caught about 90 steelhead this year. And First Nations food fisheries caught about 1,900 steelhead in the Skeena, and we don't have numbers for the approach water, so that's a big impact on a return of 5,400. Also, our steelhead are caught in Southeast Alaskan fisheries, but Alaska provides us no information on how many steelhead were caught, released, harvested, and it could be significant, but we do not know at this time. For Nass steelhead, the Nass saw a low return of 5,275. An average return is about 13,000, and a minimum escapement goal of 4,200, a target of 10,500. So at least we're above the minimum escapement goal. First Nations food fisheries caught about 50 Nass steelhead, and the Seine fishery in the mouth of the Nass caught about 93 steelhead. And again, we do not know the impacts that Alaskan fisheries had on Nass steelhead this year. The Dean River on the Central Coast was low this year, but not as bad as the Skeena was. So next is Chum. Skeena Chum return was extremely low, about 8,000. It used to average 50,000 or more. Very few of these of Skeena Chum are caught in local fisheries. Alaska caught over 7 million chum this year, and we don't know how many of those would have been headed to the Skeena system or Nass system or other North Central Coast systems. For Nass chum, there was about 120,000 returned to the Nass River itself and nearby coastal rivers. So it's a good return, although some systems like the Kootsmatine and Iliants had poor returns. Seine Fishery caught about 14,000 chum, and there were very few other fisheries that would have intercepted Nass chum other than, of course, Alaskan fisheries. For Kitimat and Douglas Channel, the chum return was about 40,000, which is really low. An average is more like 200,000 chum for those river systems. There were no commercial fisheries in Douglas Channel this year, and the wreck fishery in Kitimat River itself, we didn't see any numbers for how many were caught there. For the Central Coast chum, generally very poor returns in the Central Coast, and there was very little commercial fishing in the Central Coast this year. So finally, for pink, the Skeena return of pink salmon was poor. There were no commercial fisheries for pinks, for Skeena pinks. There's very little First Nations food fisheries and recreational harvest. Alaska caught about 48 million pink this year, and we have no idea how many of those would have been headed to the Skeena or other North and Central Coast systems. The Nass had an average return this year of about 570,000. Roughly 160,000 were caught in the Seine fishery in the mouth of the Nass, and about 3,200 were caught in food fisheries. For Kitimat and Douglas Channel pinks, the return was generally low to those systems, and there were no commercial fisheries. There was some recreational harvest, although not high numbers. So for 2022, this coming year, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans provided forecasts for Skeena and Nass sockeye. So for Skeena sockeye, they estimate that about 2 million will return this coming year, which is average, and an average return and much better than recent years. So fingers crossed. For Nass sockeye, DFO is estimating 471,000 return. An average to return to the Nass is about 600,000. So below average, but not bad, not a bad return. So hopefully we'll see those good returns, Skeena and Nass, but forecasting is becoming much more unreliable these days due to changing environmental conditions. So we'll have to see what actually happens in season. There are no forecasts for other species at this time. DFO will be providing a Salmon Outlook and environmental conditions presentation on December 16th, and we'll provide the link to that. They provide a lot of really good information in that, so I recommend watching it. And that's all for me. There's way more going on, but couldn't provide everything in this video. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at info@skeenawild.org, and thanks for watching.